Welcome to the Lott Carey Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving podcast. I'm Reverend Dr. Jacqueline Madison McQuarrie, pastor of the First Baptist Church of New Market in Piscataway, New Jersey, and learning coordinator for Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving. The Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving weekly podcast grows from a multi-year journey among pastors committed to flourishing in ministry. This is a project of the Lott Carey Foreign Mission Society and is made possible through the generous support from the Lilly Endowment. Learn more about Lott Carey and how it helps churches to extend the Christian witness throughout the world at lottcarey.org. That's LOTTCAREY.org. Join us for weekly conversations with pastoral thought leaders who share wisdom from the Black church for the whole church. Let's join Reverend Dr. David Emmanuel Goatley, Associate Dean for Vocational Formation and Christian Witness at Duke Divinity School, and the Project Director for Lott Carey's Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving. This week, he's in conversation with Reverend Dr. Cynthia Turner Wood, pastor of Dayspring Community Church in Lanham, Maryland.
We're grateful to be in conversation today in the Lott Carey Pilgrimage of Striving and Thriving podcast with Dr. Cynthia Turner Wood. She's the lead pastor at the Dayspring Community Church in Lanham, Maryland. Dr. Turner Wood, we're grateful for your joining us today. Thanks for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here and to join in the conversation.
Well, you are one of the team leaders for an exciting project that Lott Carey is leading, where we're facilitating more than 50 pastors on a pilgrimage toward flourishing in ministry. And our assumption, as you know, is that every round does not go higher and higher. Mm-hmm. We believe that flourishing in ministry requires both striving and thriving, and that flourishing in ministry can sometimes be understood like a tree. There are times where there are leaves in bloom. There are times where there are blossoms. Sometimes leaves are falling away, and sometimes there are only branches. Still, the tree can be healthy and thriving. Can you describe for us what flourishing in ministry looks like to you?
So seasons, probably for me, is how I describe flourishing in ministry. That as we go through seasons, spring, summer, winter, fall, each of those brings with it its own peculiarities. Some seasons are harder than others. Some are darker than others. Some feel longer, depending on where you are, than others, colder and all of that. And so, and then on the other hand, there are some seasons that are full of light and warmth and more welcoming. And ministry has felt like that to me, that there have been times when it has been good and easy and joyous. And then there have been other times when it's been cold and dark. But the reason I like the season example, which correlates somewhat with the tree, is that it's a bit more expansive than the tree. Because for me, the tree is one entity by itself. And the seasons kind of at least go across a pastoral, for me, a pastoral kind of a scene. I'm a country girl and spent my summers with my grandparents in the country. And what I noticed with them is even when times were hard, there was something that kept them going and that kept them strong regardless of what the season was. And I think flourishing in ministry equates to that regardless, if it can be a hard winter and a difficult time, but it can also be a time of flourishing because of what you're hoping for and what you've built on, and how much you get out of even the struggle together. So while I like the sturdiness and the stability of the tree, that I need something a bit more fluid and mobile, and that kind of goes with the waves, goes with the flow of things, and that is more encompassing. So for me, it's not just the tree, it's the forest, it's the pasture, it's the landscape. Flourishing takes all of that into account, as opposed to one isolated entity in those things. Playing that out, I think for me, then that would mean that church, flourishing in church takes into consideration the church. It takes into consideration the family and the extracurricular life and the study and the lived experience and the self-care, if there is any. And all of that participates in the whole act of flourishing or striving, if not the flourishing part.
When you talked about kind of the seasons and the climate, as ways of describing flourishing. I live in a part of the country where sometimes people joke and say you can have all 4 seasons in one day. So you can need a jacket and it's cold, and it can be hot. It can be all in between in one day. Have you ever experienced days of ministry where it's like you had all 4 seasons all in one, maybe 24-hour or 48-hour period?
Absolutely. And there are some days where you go through them, and tomorrow the next day you just want to stay in bed because you don't know, because of all that happened on yesterday. It was so much that you deserve an extra day. But and I think in ministry, when we start talking about that, one of the things we have not left space for, and I don't talk about it a lot because it's not popular, but we don't leave space for disappointment, and we don't leave space for. So when you talk about, everybody's good with every round going higher and higher, but and this whole notion of levels, I've always hated, we go on to the next level, and, there's a devil at every level, and all of that. I just don't see, as I look at the ministry of Jesus, I just don't see it being that way. There were highs, of course, but there were also lows, and so going up also meant coming back down and dealing with what was going on down below. I think the church has been really inadequate in dealing with disappointment, and recognizing that even with disappointment, there are growth points. There are places of, and maybe some of the best growth points I've had have come through disappointment. Not while I'm in it, Lord knows I don't want it and I don't, seek it and all of that, but they have taught me some of the best lessons, and given me out of that some of the best assurances that God is with us in it all and through it all, that all things really do work together for good, that there is a place on the other side of through. My grandmama used to say, there's a bright side somewhere, don't you rest until you find it, that song. And the longer I live and the more that I go through, I become more assured of that.
We don't hear that often when people talk about thriving and flourishing. Thanks for noting that. And in our pilgrimage, we've been working with something we call a formula for flourishing, not the formula, but a formula, that holds that there's a relationship between capacity, context, and content. And that if a pastor's leadership capacity plus service context yields their content, there's a higher probability for flourishing. And so this is assuming that we don't need to try to drag and drop what somebody else is doing. Can you talk to us some about how your context of service informs your content of ministry?
So let me give you a little bit of history about Dayspring. Dayspring is 24 years old. I am the second pastor. I'm in my 15th year of pastoring. I helped found the church. In 24 years, we have never owned our own building. We are a Black church without a building. So that makes us a little bit unique in learning how to operate in community with other churches, in partnership with other churches to accomplish things that we can't accomplish on our own without a building. We've met in schools, we've met in hotels, and last, before COVID hit, we were sharing space in a church, the Jubilee United Church of Christ, which was generously offering us space. And so that was really hospitable in their sharing of that space. And so that's the closest that we ever came to feeling like we had our own church building. So that creates some peculiarities about our capacity and our context, in the sense that we can't even do, if we wanted to, what other churches do. You know, we can't, a lot of churches in this area are event-based churches, and that, you know, they run from event to event to event. And while I don't necessarily even seek that model, that's not something we could copy if we wanted to. So what I've learned in terms of, I think, my own capacity as leadership capacity, as one who believes in shared leadership, and one who is an introvert, I have tried to demonstrate that all that we do comes through who we are. One of the things that I lament, I think, a little bit, is that I don't have a congregation full of people who are hungry to sit down and study and to delve into the word, and, you know, the way that I would want to do it. What I have learned is I have people who are much more doers, who learn. So I can give an example of Jesus feeding the 5,000 and then talk about how it's important for us to do that. And they will learn that way. They'll prepare sandwiches. We'll go to the shelters. We'll feed. We will go to the nursing homes and, you know, minister there and do those kinds of things. I have people who are much more hands-on people than they are people who are studying all the time. So we've built our ministry around, rather than events, we've built it around projects.
Can you give us an example of something, that a capacity that either you would name for yourself or that others name for you, and how that informs ministry that you lead?
I really think being an introvert and being contemplative and having proclivities toward those kind of moments and environments have set up a place where those who are also leaning in that direction can find some home and find comfort in knowing that all of what we do does not have to be boisterous and in front of everybody, but that there are places that that God meets us that are quiet and still, and sometimes isolated, sometimes with other people. So the work that I've done at the Shalem Institute for spirituality and developing and deepening a contemplative lifestyle, again, I think probably goes a little bit against what's traditional for us as Baptists, who are prone or given to more noisy kinds of worship, to put it politely, and I do mean that politely.
Do you find that you meet very many pastoral leaders who share that introversion and contemplative, or are you a part of a pretty narrow group of colleagues?
Yeah, I would guess that, for many of the pastors that I see, I would guess that they are extroverts and that they love being around people and that they are drawn to people. However, in conversation with many of those same pastors, I find out that they are introverts as well. But I often feel like they do a much better job than I do of carrying that out. So an introvert, it's not that an introvert can't function in spaces with people and crowds. They just have to work really hard to do it. And then they've got to go someplace and decompress, and refuel by being alone. I have never felt as though I was great in those spaces or drawing people in those spaces the way that I have admired in some of my colleagues who are able to do it. So, but it is amazing to me how many of us are introverts who are called to this extroverted kind of a profession or vocation.
A word to our listeners. Lott Carey's Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving podcast is funded by the Lilly Endowment through its Thriving in Ministry initiative. We'll be right back with more from the interview.
Since 1897, the Lott Carey Global Christian Missional Community has helped churches to extend the Christian witness around the world through prayer partnership, financial support, and technical assistance. We come alongside indigenously led communities to support ministries of evangelism, compassion, empowerment, and advocacy. Together, we are touching lives with transforming love. You can invest in churches, schools, clinics, and more throughout the world. Visit us at lottcarey.org. That's LOTTCAREY.org. Thanks for your partnership in this ministry.
Welcome back to the Lott Carey podcast, Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving. I'm Reverend Dr. Jacqueline Madison McQuarrie, the Learning Coordinator of Lott Carey's Thriving in Ministry program. Each week in this podcast, my colleague, Reverend Dr. David Emmanuel Goatley, interviews a prominent Black pastoral leader to gain insight for flourishing in ministry. Now back to more of his interview with Reverend Dr. Cynthia Turner Wood, pastor of Dayspring Community Church in Lanham, Maryland.
How does your interest in and being drawn to being a contemplative person, how does that help you in terms of either your preparation for or practice of a ministry of leadership?
Immensely. And it brings, it is the difference between me laboring through the work and me joyously doing the work. I can remember, and I first learned this probably a decade ago when I attended a session at the National Cathedral called the Black Rhetoric for Women Preachers or something like that, with Emily Towns and Valerie Bridgman. And I went to this event because the way that I described myself was I was bored with my own preaching. And just bored with all of it. And so I didn't know anyone else in the session at the time. What I had come to learn, we spent, I think, about 4 or 5 days at the cathedral on site, and we had time to study and time to pray and alone time and time to get group time together as well. But what I came away with was being excited again about my preaching. And I realized that when I get bored or when it's toilsome and really, really hard is when it's because I haven't had those moments to pull away and to go deeper and to this is my expression, to meet myself under the tree. Okay, that's where that's where I meet God, and that's where I meet myself. And so even now with COVID and trying to learn the technology and trying to, put a Sunday service together and put scripts together and, all of the things now that we have to do, my real self is somewhere under the tree waiting for me to come and spend that time so that I can, joyously get back to the work that I'm called to do.
Many pastors seem to be busy all the time and seem to struggle with perhaps finding the tree to meet themselves under.
Yeah.
Do you ever meet some of those, or do some of them ever ask you, for example, if I'm not wired to do more of the contemplative experience, are there some ways that I may not become a contemplative Christian, but are there some practices that you have learned or that you would recommend that pastors consider to help nourish their roots so that they can flourish?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the spiritual disciplines are very underrated and very underused. In my life, again, there was a time when I was much, much better at it, and I would hazard to say, because of all of the demands that pastoring has, it's probably underutilized in so many lives. We miss out on so much. I think, it has to be something that each pastor finds joy from. So whether it's praying, or whether it's meditating or contemplating, or whether it's taking long walks, whatever it is for that person, I do think we benefit from doing those things. And we suffer when we don't. We suffer terribly. And not only do we suffer, the people around us suffer, because we need that feeding. We need that. I mean, who better than Jesus to give us that example of pulling away and coming out from among them, and taking the time to replenish with God and God alone.
Could you tell us about an area of leadership that you have had to develop as a pastor?
I've had to develop into being a pastor. So let me explain. So the church that I pastor now, started 24 years ago. I was part of the team that started it. I was in on the vision planning and everything that went along with it. But I came in as executive pastor. I was second chair. I'm a good second chair. I like second chair. I like implementing. You tell me what we gonna do, and then give me the freedom to go carry it out. And I'll tap the people, and I'll pull it together, and I'll make it happen. And I'm good at that. I really, that's where I feel like I fit the best. And then this pastoring thing came about. Much longer story to tell, but now I'm finding myself not second chair anymore. And some would think, you would automatically think that moving from second chair to first chair, it's not that far. You could, it's almost the same thing. It is vastly different. It is the sites are completely different. The weight is different. The responsibility is different. And the day-to-day is different. And so I have had to, make that shift and find comfort in it, and do it in such a way that I believe that this is where God has placed me. And so coming in, I said, I don't know how to pastor. And what I've heard about pastors is that they come into a church, they get called to a church, and they bring this vision plan, right? They already have it laid out. They know what they're going to do, and they tell the people, this is what we're going to do. And I know you're not supposed to make changes the first year or two while you're there and all of that, but they go in and they have a plan. That's what I've always heard. And so when I became pastor, I was terrified because I did not have a vision for the church. I just didn't. And so I called my friend Jason Barr, who's gone on to be with the Lord, but who has always been a confidant, a wise man, who was pastor of Macedonia Baptist Church in Pittsburgh. And I explained everything to Jason, and I said, maybe I shouldn't even be doing this because I don't have a vision. I didn't come in here. God didn't give me that. And he comforted me, told me not to worry, and to say, you really should not go in with this set plan about what you're going to lay on these people and do, with these people, even though I had been there the whole time. But that the vision comes from the people and the pastor together, that we move together in that. We create that organically. And so I've learned over time that's been a good approach for us. It took a minute to get there. It took some confidence building, and it took some shifting because I was not, many of the people who had begun pastoring had known me for decades, and I wasn't little Cynthia to them, but I was Cynthia. And so even making the shift to, to calling me pastor, to seeing me as pastor, that took a little while as well.
What brings you the greatest joy as a pastor?
The greatest joy as a pastor is preaching a good sermon. I'm in my element when it's a good sermon and it's hitting on all pistons, or whatever the expression is. I believe that I'm in that moment, I am doing what God has called me to do, and I'm being who God has called me to be. Right alongside that, concomitant with that. So I don't want to make it higher and lower, but right alongside that is I get joy from seeing lives transformed, from seeing people get aha moments, from recognizing that Jesus is real, that or gaining some new understanding that liberates them from something that has held them bound in something they learned in Sunday school, or something they believed about themselves that what they thought was unfixable or unchangeable, and all of that. And then I think probably thirdly, concomitant with those two things would be building community. When community comes together, and the projects that I described earlier, when we're all working together and seeing that take shape or take form. Remember, I have the blessed experience of being a church planter. And so I've been in church all my life, but there is nothing like the planting of a church, when people who may have been disenfranchised in other churches, or people who were not a part of a church, all come together in a place believing that God can do something with them, and that God has called them or called us into community to do something. And so, I saw people who came from the old church who never used to do anything stand up and do things we never had any idea they could do. And people try things that they never thought that they even could see themselves doing. And then having folks come in who just never were church folk, come into the church. That is, to me, that's ultimate joy.
Is there one or a few big pieces of advice that you have found helpful that you would like to pass on to others who are interested in flourishing in ministry?
I think the advice that I would give, which is the advice that's been given to me over the years, is to take time out and pull away. In all of throughout this Thriving in Ministry program, whenever I have an opportunity to ask a question, I don't intend it to be, but I recognize now that I'm always asking, what do you do in those dry seasons? How do you get through the dry seasons? What do you do when you're not hearing anything, you're not feeling anything? And even though other people may be benefiting from your ministry, you just don't feel anything. You're going through the motions, you're faking it till you make it and all of that. And so I asked that of so many of our pastors, Dr. Stewart, Dr. West, Dr. Flake, who've spoken to us. And they've all said the same thing in their own ways, which is what I'm saying to you in the answer to this question. Take some time, pull away and replenish and refill and do whatever it is. And I think Dr. West said, go to sleep, get yourself some sleep. If you're probably tired, but also, go walk the dog and go do, take the time that you need to take to do some self-care, to not always be tending to everybody else's needs and making sure that everybody else is okay. That it has, again, going back to the time when I said I was bored with my own preaching, when I feel that feeling, I know that I need to step away for a minute, find that place and that time. I actually have a space. I have a space in, we don't own the land anymore, but when we owned the land in right outside of Lynchburg, Virginia, in Concord, where I believe that I met the Lord face to face in my own, my own time of walking those dirt roads back and forth. I pulled away and sat by the creek and little spot, and I just believe that's the place where God and I met, like really met intimately. And so it's different now, but every now and then I may drive down to that space and sit there for a little while. I don't feel as safe and comfortable to do that for a long period, but I will find it and just recenter in as much as possible. So whatever the centering thing is that people need, I would suggest they keep that as sacred as possible.
Dr. Cynthia Turner Wood, pastor of the Dayspring Community Church in Lanham, Maryland. Thank you for joining us. This has been a wonderful conversation in our Pilgrimage of Striving and Thriving podcast. We're grateful for your wisdom, and we're grateful for your witness and for the time you spent talking with us today.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it immensely.
Thank you for joining us today for Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving, a weekly podcast from Lott Carey as we listen in on conversations with prominent pastoral thought leaders. Join us next week for a conversation with a new guest and fresh insights. Wisdom from the Black Church for the whole church. I'm Reverend Dr. Jacqueline Madison McQuarrie. Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving is produced in partnership with Good Faith Media. Music by Makita McQuarrie. Share the word with those who need to hear it. Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving, wherever you get your podcasts. Also listen online at lottcarey.org.